we didn't use those words, learning or development. It was about, if you want to progress in your career,
Now
if you
you're
want more
really showing your
knowledge.
age, Graham. Now you.
Well, I know I am showing my age.
So when you were
And
sitting there with your quill pen and with the parchment paper doing your numbers, etc., and
saying, where's
yeah,
me
and
ink?
cashing up that day, were you still, was
Oh
it
God.
florins still that you were working with? Yeah. Anyway, I'm digressing. I'm digressing. Hello again. Only me, Joe España, and welcome to this episode of Gobo Glimpses of the Blindingly Obvious, your everyday antidote to organizational effectiveness podcasts. Well, what a week I've had. It's been knackering, curious, and inspiring, all in equal measure. I've been working quite a bit lately in the leadership and effectiveness space, and talking with a client got me thinking about today's theme. The theme for today's episode is 360-degree feedback. Is it more trouble than it's worth? And in particular, when and how do organizations use it? So I thought, who could I chat with to help me out with this thought provocation? And of course, the person who came to mind straight away was my old mate, Graham Da Costa. You may already know Graham. As well as a long and successful track record in the corporate world, Graham has been heading up Shine Feedback since 1995. That's how long. He's worked with many sectors, launching and managing their 360 feedback processes. He's also a qualified coach who, as Graham himself would put it, is driven to help people live more satisfying business and personal lives. He likes to tell me often that Socrates once told him, "I cannot teach anybody anything. I can only make them think," which only goes to show what wisdom Graham has, never mind his age. You know, I think it's really interesting when, in my experience, I've been asked to work with a client on some development program, and the very first thing I say is, what do you think about having some form of 360 so that the individual's got data, and we then design the program, not in general terms, but in very specific terms about what the group requires. So it's ultimately the leadership program's designed almost bespoke to your specific needs. And I'm always surprised when they say, "Oh yeah, well, we know what the needs are, so I don't think we need that 360 data or anything like that." And I'm just wondering, when they say we don't need it, or we're not ready for 360, what's going on?
Well, yeah, I think it's an interesting thing. I've got an actual questionnaire that I have used on numerous occasions with clients on to try and assess their readiness for 360.
All right, it's really interesting. I was just talking to somebody the other day, and it might even have been you actually, where just this
We
is only a
speak too much. We speak too much.
well, Graham, it's a factor of my age that I forget who I'm speaking to
Yeah,
literally
ditto.
5 minutes after I've spoken to them.
Ditto.
But something came up which I thought was really interesting. Is I think this is the first time. I'm pretty certain this is true. This is the first time in sort of any specific sort of industrial age that we can think of where we've got, I think it's 4 or 5 generations actually working in the workforce all at the same time. And it occurred to me that actually could be a contextual thing going on with the climate you've described, the feedback. It seems to me, and maybe this has been sort of focused on a bit more because of COVID or whatever, but millennials are really suspicious. Or maybe, it's true of other generations, but I think that the expectations of the latter generations around feedback and maybe a sort of more formal process like 360, they're kind of a little bit skeptical about it all. And I think one of the things that's at play is because their experience of the managers they have, who are totally of a different generation and with different expectations of work and everything that means for them. What it means to go to work and be employed, and your loyalty to a company, let's say, all these different factors. I think there's a disparity in perspective between these generations. And so I'm what do you think? I reckon that
I totally agree. Totally and utterly agree. And it's interesting. A lot of my recent coaching stuff, especially with managers, leaders, has been around, not that they've phrased it like this, how the hell do I manage these millennials?
Yeah. Well, yeah. When you find out, let me know.
Well, yeah, and I'm getting these issues in terms of, I tell people, because I was brought up in where somebody tells you what to do, so you to go and do something, so you do it. Now the millennials have been brought up through school and all the rest of it to say, yeah, okay, why?
Yeah.
Why do you want me to do that? What's the benefit for me in doing that? Which sounds very selfish, but I don't think it is. They've just been brought up, and I've got 3 kids who are millennials, to question. So they question everything.
I think they do. And I think the other thing that's at play here is, I think, as I mentioned, it's almost like their expectations of work are totally different. So
yeah,
it's kind of almost there's loads of debate at the moment in social media and elsewhere about this notion of purpose. How do I fit? I work for for something else, not just for the output of this bit of work and the pay I might get for it and the rewards and remuneration I might get, but for some other reason, there's this notion of contribution. So, Generation Z and millennials, I think, are more in that space.
I think one of the things, when I think back on this, when we started out in our careers a couple of years ago or whenever it was, if you look around the people that we were working with, they were all of a similar ilk. Now, admittedly, I started in banking, but so they were all of a similar ilk, and they'd all been through the same thing. They'd all done, they were all sort of. I'm being incredibly stereotypical here, so forgive me, but they're all married with 2.x, 2. Whatever kids. And they're there for life, or they're there for to do a good job and go home, and and again, this was at the time, it was in my profession in banking, that you went home, your wife cooked the tea, and and all these kind of, it was some of the stuff used to go was dreadful. Whereas now, when you've got a millennial in an organization, they're dealing with they've got some baby boomers just left around. They've got the the Gen Zs, and all those other ones which I've forgotten now what they were.
XYZ.
So XYZ, yeah. So they've got more, and they were very distinct. So therefore, they're looking around, and there's not one same thing. Yeah.
I totally agree. The thing, something that you just said, which I want to pick up on, is so how does this play back in terms of let's call it receptiveness of 360? I think one of the things that's at play here is that generations, certainly my generation and probably my parents' generation, the notion here was, if you wanted to get ahead in your career, forget work-life balance. It's like whatever's required in order to move on. I don't get the impression at all that there is a willingness to compromise, and why should they, around this notion of work-life balance. So that's a significant difference between generation millennials and baby boomers. If a baby boomer would have said, in banking or loads of other industries, in order to get ahead, if I have to do 60 hours a week or 70 hours a week, well, that's what's needed. I'm not sure that, latter generations are in that space. And therefore, I think that clouds their receptiveness to just the very notion of feedback. Oh, in the climate context that you described.
Well, perhaps that might be, but it's interesting. When I was at Midland at one point when it got taken over by HSBC, and I remember very clearly HSBC coming in and sort of saying, "Without work, you do not have a life."
Well, they actually said those words.
They actually said that because their view was the fact you have work that provides you with the income, and it's a very stable income which allows you to have your life. So without work, you don't have a life. Now, I didn't agree with that, which is why I left quite soon after they took over. But that was
There
neither
will
here,
be
here nor there.
exceptions. So okay. So let's say that
Sorry. Can I just say as well, Joe? Though, what I was going to say that even I've been dealing with 360 now for the last 28 years. All right, and so 28 years ago, we didn't have the Generation Z and millennials and all the rest of it, but we still had that issue where people were, sort of, well, I don't really know if I want this feedback. But I think that a lot of it is because the fact they were frightened. They've never had feedback before. They weren't, what are people going to say? All it's going to be is they're just going to pull out all the things that I'm dreadful at.
that's really
So
interesting. So you're talking about the subject, the person who's going to get the
yes,
360. I think
yes.
there's more to it. Let's corral this a little bit more, because I definitely agree that that's happening. That the subject, the person getting the 360 report, might have all these questions about what's this about, and actually I'm not interested in getting bad inverted commas feedback, etc. But I'm just wondering with the respondents, who would include Generation
Mhm.
X, Y, Z,
Yeah,
millennials
yeah,
as well, whether
yeah.
they're thinking, maybe. So the what's right? Tell you what's running through my mind. Question, and you can answer this question probably better than I. Is the truthfulness of the response, the scoring, whatever, influenced by the attitude of the generation? Um, Respondents of a older generation were always, perhaps, maybe overgeneralization, mindful of who's going to read this. Does my response, and if they discover that it was me making that response and giving that scoring, will that affect anything in terms of my relationship with my manager who's getting the 360, etc.? What do you reckon?
There was definitely, yes. I think generally a yes. Yeah. Nowadays, I don't think they really care. I suppose what was going through my mind was, when I've had similar situations like that, I go back, yeah, but it depends on what you're asking them, and it depends on the way in which the question is phrased. So it's not a science. There is a bit of an art in writing a 360 question,
I
and it's
agree.
and if it's behaviorally based, which it should be, it shouldn't be about has Joe met these these objectives this year. It's got nothing to do with that. It's the way in which it's a behavioral thing. um I think nowadays people are more they get feedback more often. I still don't think it's given in a great way, but that's another subject. But they do get feedback. um and yeah, I think there was a lot of skepticism. Yeah, so I remember the first organization back in 1996, 7 that we used 360 with. This was like, what? What the hell is this? And we used it similar to what you were saying. And I don't mean this to go back to where in terms of constructing this development program. And we constructed the development program purely around the
Yeah,
360.
that's how I
So
would use it.
each group of people that came in, there was an overview, but generally the uh, each individual course was different, even though they were from the same organization.
Yeah.
We knew what the overall objectives were, and so they all got that. But if we had a group that were really good on communication, why are we going to spend half a day on communication when they're already do it? Let's spend it on this area where they're not so good at it.
I was going to say, just picking up on that a bit further, is so the purpose of providing a 360 process was for development reasons,
Yeah.
and you were sort of bespoking the detail of the program around a core, which was the overall, behavioral construct that the company or the organization was focusing on. That's fine, but in terms of this not being, when they say, "Oh no, we don't think it's a good idea to have 360 because we're just not ready for it."
I,
Let's assume that you did do it anyway. You managed to convince them, and this generational thing where the respondent was a bit, oh, what's this about, and who's going to see this, and what's the impact here? How did you deal with that kind of resistance? So you got past resistance number one, we're not ready, and now you got resistance number two, which is the individual saying, "Oh, I'm not sure I'm accepting of this feedback." Particularly, I would imagine when they perceive it as being really negative in some way. Some of the scoring is really low, and they think, "Oh no, that's definitely not me. They've obviously got it wrong."
I think there are two things there. So the resistance I've had from organizations, and it's a specific part of the organization, let's face it, it's the HR training department I've got this program, can this, that, and the other. Well, do you have 360? No. Why? Well, because I've already done my research into why I'm going to do this. I don't want you to do a 360, which then shows that actually what we're going to do is not what people want or require, which is going to make me look a bit of an idiot. So therefore, no, I'm not going to do that. And that as I've certainly had that before, as opposed to others sort of, because I've said something, well, we should have been in at the early stages because, you've developed this and you think it's right. And that, okay, it's your organization, fair enough. However, if that's not, or if you're doing this 360, I've had one occasion I remember where they wanted us to do a 360 that was measuring stuff that had nothing to do with the program. And I said, well, if this all comes out low, what are you going to do?
Because the program's not addressing it at all.
The program's not addressing it. Well, we'll cover that. So I think there's that.
But how did you tackle it, though? I think, for me, a lot of it is to do with the conversations that happen, as you say, right at the beginning about the notion of a 360, what its benefits are, what its potential limitations are, and understanding the fit of the process of a 360. I mean, we're not even discussing the quality of the statements and the construct of the actual behaviors themselves. But even let's assume that was all okay. I think the answer to this, we're not ready or we don't want to use it, is really talking about what would be required in advance of using it in order to for it to land appropriately and get acceptance, and thinking about its value and its benefits, and then also getting them to understand what comes out the other end. But what about the individual and the resistance that may exist in the individual?
Well, there's two things, I suppose, and that questionnaire I was talking about, which is actually to get you to ascertain, well, what is the readiness for this organization? The results from that, it will tell you where your areas of concern may be. It might be something like, my boss welcomes the use of 360 feedback. No, everyone's scored that down. So I don't want to do a 360 because my boss doesn't welcome the use of it, or doesn't, won't do anything about it. Or after receiving 360, my boss would help me in my efforts to develop me. No, they won't. So therefore, well, what am I doing this for? Because no one's going to help me. So it helps highlight, is this an organizational issue that people don't understand what 360 is? So, okay, fine. We can run some workshops and telling them that. Is it more about, I don't think my results are going to be confidential, or that my results or my assessment is really low. So does that mean I'm going to be put on some remedial pile or whatever? So it's identifying which areas are causing concern. And when I've done this, and there's only 26 items, and if they're all come back scoring high, well, then your organization is ready for it, isn't it? Because what other areas aren't, that we haven't assessed. So I think quite often it's the individual you're talking to isn't ready, but they can dress it up, say this organization isn't ready. But actually, are they saying the organization, or is it just you?
That's really interesting. How have you dealt with then getting past the resistance of individuals for the whether they think this feedback's meaningless, or it might be used negatively against me, or I'm not going to get any additional support? What have you actually done about that?
I think a lot of it, what we tend to do is that, especially the first time, is we would run a lot of briefing sessions.
Yeah.
So just before it's going out, we're sort of run, they're only an hour and a half briefing with everybody, saying this is why we're doing it. This is, or why your organization's doing it. These are the questions, etc. This is how the feedback will be handled, etc. And also we tell them about, we give them the example of how, or teach them really how to write feedback. So what, and we go through that notion about behind every behavior, there's a positive intention.
Right.
So it's the intention versus the versus action. So I give them two silly examples. So when did you last get up in the morning and say, "Oh, I'm going to be really useless at my job today"? Or when did you get up in the morning and say, "Do you know what, the people I'm going to meet today, I'm going to give them hell. They're going to wish they'd never set foot because I'm going to make their life a misery"? Well, we don't, but occasionally we make mistakes at work and occasionally we upset people, but that's not our intention. Or if it is our intention, it's from our perspective, it's positive. So when you explain that, so when you get if some feedback is having an adverse impact on you, then, when I'm debriefing it and sort of saying, oh, okay, if so that's upset you in some way. Yes, it has. Do you think the person is, meant when they wrote that to upset you? And unless they're psychologically disturbed, 99.9% of the occasion, they say, well, no. Okay, I'm not denying that it hasn't, but try to look behind that. So they need to be helped through it. So I'm not a lover of saying, yeah, here's a 360 report. I'm biased and I say, well, I think our reports are you can sit and read them by yourself, but I still think people need help in terms of understanding what that is. And even just to talk about, that positive intention versus impact is really, really important. Now, our questionnaires, we construct them in a way so people write the impact. So we don't just say, what's Joe good at here? We're saying, what's the positive impact that he's having on this? What's the adverse impact he's having upon this? What future impact would you like him to have? And always discussing that or pushing that impact. Not that, oh, Joe's a great bloke, or I don't like grey jumpers that he wears on a Thursday.
I'd be killed on all those elements anyway. Getting a document with a wodge of information about you, and you're pretty good at this stuff and you're not so good at this stuff, still needs to be processed both cognitively and emotionally. I think some people, depending on how the impact that the report itself is having on them, they still need to sort of get through it and decide, what does it all mean and what do I want to do about it, etc. Because I guess that going back to the resistance thing, there will be some people where that, and I'm just thinking in my career, I've probably had two, definitely one I can absolutely visualize even to today, where they were absolutely, this is nonsense, this is not me, I don't know who replied to all these. Of course, it was really funny because I then said to him, it wasn't him, it was you that chose your respondents, wasn't it? Apart from your direct line manager where you had no choice, you chose who you wanted to be your respondents.
Good response.
Yeah. And then he then said, but this is really, I don't know, I don't agree with any of this. And it was a really interesting sort of, pushback completely. And so what's been your experience around that in terms of the individual sort of resisting the feedback they're getting?
I suppose I come back and sort of say, and if it was that case, where someone said, this just isn't me. Well, okay, well, you've had more than one person giving you this feedback. It seems to be consistent. The consistent theme is this. Why would they be saying that? Go back to the positive intentions. Why would they be saying this then?
Yeah.
So is it that it's not you, or you just don't recognize you and what you are doing? So it's sort of exploring their own idea of their own, self-perception. How good or how detailed is it? And a number of people, going back a few, I think it's better now with the millennials, to be fair. It wasn't that great.
I think millennials and sort of younger generations, whether they're probably Y and Z and millennials, are probably a little bit more open to this kind of conversation. And they probably have, well, my perception is that they have a bit more self-awareness than, say, older generations who are head down, get on with the work, climb the greasy pole of your career, etc. I think younger generations have got the notion of self-development more on their radar than perhaps previous generations. Or let's put it this way, maybe that's not exactly true because I don't have any data, but my perception is that it's kind of a bit more conscious about it. So therefore, having that information, whether they like it, don't like it, or feel uncomfortable about it, they somehow start thinking, well, okay, it is what it is. Maybe I agree with some of it, maybe I don't agree with some of it, but I'm willing to then take the next step, which is what do I do about developing myself in area A, B, or C, whatever it was. So I think that does come into play. And I think it all comes back to me, for me at least, around that debrief and how you manage that debrief and getting people to process and come to terms about the meaning. Blimey, my brain has gone into meltdown. I'll have to have a refreshing cup of chamomile tea. You know, the problem with these chats is that I rediscover how much more there is to know about the subject. But in the meantime, you can tap below to get the links and show notes. And if you enjoyed what you heard and you want to hear more, why not follow or subscribe to the show, share the podcast, or tell your friends about Gobo. But most importantly, I'd love to hear from you. You can find me, Joe España, on LinkedIn or get in touch via the website. I'd love to keep the conversation going. Let me have your thoughts, questions, or ideas for topics you'd like me to cover in future episodes. Take care, and I'll catch up with you next time. Adiós. Hasta pronto.